Hey everybody, it's Nathan Selove with another episode of Autism Actually Speaking. I don't know why I always say that so weirdly. Actually speaking. Today's topic is something that I really hope will be very helpful to others on the spectrum. Coping with meltdowns. Almost every single autistic that I've ever met has at one point had to deal with the infamous autistic meltdown. Autistic meltdowns often happen when there's some kind of sensory overload or outside factor that really upsets the autistic, or even a combination of both. For example, as a child, I had a very strong sense of justice, and whenever an authority figure would do something that I felt was them abusing their authority, that would sometimes give me a meltdown. And I used to have meltdowns quite often. Now, fortunately, it got a lot better as I got older, got better at coping, got more accommodations, and also my service dogs. However, even with all of that, I am certainly not immune to having meltdowns. So I wanted to give some tips that I've learned over the years for how to handle meltdowns, how to minimize them, and how to redirect them. My father, who, for those of you that don't know, is an anatomy and physiology professor, once explained to me that the neurological aspects of an autistic meltdown actually have some similarities to that of an epileptic seizure. So some of the feelings that we experience are very similar, which is one of the major reasons why service dogs can be very helpful to both people with epilepsy and autistics. So the first thing I would say is that for those of you that do have autism service dogs, and I know that there's quite a few in my audience, don't forget to remind yourself to use your dog. I know that might seem pretty obvious, but there have been times where I've been approaching a meltdown in public, and Jess will actually have to come up to me and remind me, hey, Nathan, use your dog. And for those of you that don't have service dogs, but might have pets at home that might be available to you and that help you, then use them. But I know that many people in my audience don't have service dogs, so here are some suggestions. The first thing is to try to physically remove yourself from the situation. And if you have another person who is with you that happens to know about your autism, see if you can use them as a resource to get you out of there. Many of the things that trigger autistic meltdowns are situational. So an extremely loud, crowded area that feels like you can't escape. For example, last spring, Jess and I were in New Orleans for this symposium during Mardi Gras, which means that there were a lot of people. And we were there with this group that wanted to go to this cafe place downtown. And when we got in there, we realized that it was one of the most crowded rooms that we had ever been in. And there was so much going on, and I was having massive sensory overload. And Jess was having a lot of trouble, and she looked at me and she was like, hey, Nathan, are you okay? And I was like, and then she was like, okay, we need to get the fudge out of here. Except she didn't say fudge. But the important thing was that we were able to get out of there and get to a more quiet spot and just relax. So try to remove yourself from the situation. The next thing I would say is don't be afraid to stim. I know that there are a lot of people that might see certain autistic stimming methods as being kind of socially inappropriate, but freaking out and having a meltdown is a lot more socially inappropriate. So anything that you can do in order to help yourself stim and get yourself into a better headspace, you should let yourself do. Which is why organizations that try to teach you how to prevent your autistic children from stimming are full of crap. Not naming any names, of course. Not speaking any names. And finally, I know that when you're melting down, it can be really hard to control yourself and to control what comes out of your mouth, but try as hard as you can to not take it out on those around you that aren't causing the meltdown. Sometimes when we're having meltdowns, it can be really difficult to keep a clear headspace and to logically think that this other person who is trying to help me is not the cause of my meltdown. In the past, when I've been melting down around people that I really did not want to take it out on, I would sometimes just prevent myself from speaking at all. At the very least, try to make sure that you're not directing any harsh words at those people. Meltdowns are probably the worst part of being autistic. I talk a lot about on this channel how I'm very proud of my autism and how in many ways autism is a gift, and I do believe that. But meltdowns can sometimes really make our lives difficult. But when we learn how to manage them, when we learn how to try to prevent them, or at least try to minimize them, it can really make our lives so much easier. When I was in middle school, I had meltdowns almost every week, sometimes more than once a week. And as I grew up, as I learned more coping mechanisms, I got to the point where that story that I told you about with the Mardi Gras, That was like 6 months ago. And that was the last meltdown that I had. And before that, it had been like 6 months before I had had another meltdown. So I really have gotten better at managing them. It is possible. And I hope that this video helps some of you to achieve that. Well, that's today's video. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this episode, please give it a like, a share, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. Check out some of my other stuff. And if you want to support the channel in other ways, support me on Patreon. In the meantime, if you have any questions or topics you'd like addressed, please leave them in the comments below. Or message me on my Facebook, also linked below. And remember, if you had a meltdown in elementary school because of the illogical nature of your teacher's seating charts, you might be autistic.